G'day, how you going? In this video I'm going to be painting a standard Legionnaire from the Imperial Fist Legion, using the Easy Glaze method. Feel free to paint along or sit back and enjoy, and let's get started. So starting from a white spray coat, I began layering all over the model with Skulker Yellow from 2 thin coats. Like most yellows, this should cover pretty well with 1 coat, but depending how rich you'd like the finished look, I'd still recommend a minimum of 2 even thin down coats, just to get a good consistent base to work from. And as always with these Horus Heresy schemes, feel free to leave any armour areas white that aren't going to be yellow down the track, just to save time and paint. And once you have your base yellow finished, it's best now to move on to the areas of the armour that will be a pain to get to on later, so like the rubber joints between the plates. And for this I used very watered down layers of Vallejo black. Again, I'd recommend doing these areas now, so when mistakes happen, and they will, you can fix them up with a quick layer of white and relayer with Skulker Yellow. So here I applied the white over any areas of the model where I got the black onto the yellow. I used the white because yellow over black is bloody well impossible, and so as to save the headache, it will go over white layer easily. Just remember to take it slow and easy. Yellow is one of those colours where if you're patient and fix mistakes as you go, will look amazing in the end. Moving on to some glazing, I chose a slightly darker yellow from the same range called Dark Sun Yellow. I didn't want too drastic of a change with these standard marines, just something that hinted the shade from its main colour. And to apply, I watered it down heavily, maybe 2 to 3 parts water to 1 part paint, but be sure to remove most off of the brush before applying. It does look very subtle on camera, and it was to an extent, but that's definitely what you want. If I chose a slightly darker yellow or even applied a stronger layers of Dark Sun Yellow, it would instantly overpower the Skulker Yellow and the glaze effect will be far harder to achieve. So build it up slowly, gradually getting lower and lower with the initial brush stroke, and as always with glaze shading, keep it limited to the more covered areas of plating, ending each brush stroke where you want the most build up of colour. For a second shade colour, I used Barbarian Brown from 2 thin coats, and feel free to skip this part. In all honesty, it probably doesn't need it for your standard guys, but if you do choose to do it, be sure to water down to a wash consistency and apply very sparingly and only onto the bottom areas of the Dark Sun Yellow and driving it into the recesses. Now to help build up that transition from shade to surface, I went back to Skulker Yellow and began glazing over the thinner areas of the Dark Sun Yellow. Yellows do blend well together, so it should only take a couple of thin layers over and you should have a nice transition between the two. Simultaneously, be sure to end your brush strokes on the opposite ends of the armour now to help build a strong base for the highlight colour next. Don't be too shy about bringing the Skulker Yellow down pretty far into the Dark Sun Yellow. You should have a bit of wiggle room to work with before you overpower it and lose that shade. but because the yellows pair so well, you could almost start on top of the dark sun yellow entirely to create some really nice blends. But again, for quick jobs like this, you don't have to overdo it. And here is probably a good midway to move on if you want, as the yellow is a good tone now with the shade and highlight. But if you want to take it a bit more brighter, then I use yellow flame from 2 thin coats and begin the same glaze method as previously, but starting halfway and working the brush up. Same concept as before, the yellow will play nicely with the previous shades, so don't be afraid to start the glaze pretty far down into the skull color yellow or even the dark sun yellow to an extent. It won't overpower immediately, which will give you plenty of time to stop before having to reapply the previous shade if needed. Here I'll point out that you will get some yellow on the previous blackened out areas, but it's really not an issue as black will cover over any small yellow marks easily. Just remember to go back if needed before moving on. Beginning the recessed shade on the panels, I thought it was best to reuse the Barbarian Brown from before to keep the overall tone consistent, and because it was so heavily watered down before, it will fit well when applied at a stronger rate, whilst looking like a darker colour altogether. So this was limited to all the deeper recesses, and in order to ensure it flowed easily, keep it very thin so as to just let it flow naturally with minimal guidance from the brush. A little tip here is to keep it to areas you know you can apply it without working the brush too much, because the yellow has so many glazed tones built up. If you make a mistake with this colour trying to get a perfect line on a surface, it won't be as simple as to just whip out one yellow and fix it up. Now for an edge highlight, I chose AK Interactive's Buff. This is a bone colour but with a bit more yellow, and because I wanted to leave somewhere to go further with a highlight for special characters, I didn't want to jump straight up to pure bone, so this was a perfect choice for a standard marine highlights. I did, however, limit it to only the yellow flame areas of the armour and left the shade areas untouched. It probably doesn't matter too much, but I really wanted to keep their shade areas alone to create that crisp yellow look. As said before, if you're not sure or confident to hit a certain spot with this colour, I'd recommend leaving it because starting over will be a bit difficult after all the shades of yellow applied previously. That being said, if limited to only the tips, yellow flame should only really be the colour there, and you could fix it up quickly with a layer over if needed. With the yellow done, now comes the tricky bit, and that would be applying all other colours with minimum mistakes. So I used AK Interactive Dark Grey, no particular reason, but I would say using grey over black would be the way to go, because as we know from before, yellow does not like black, so if a mistake is made, yellow can be applied easier over grey. So on that note, I applied a grey coat over all the areas that were to be metallic, and this included the strapping over the chest and the studs on the shoulder plate, as well as applying all over the bolt gun. And for the metallics I chose more silvers than gold, so for this I used Pro Acryl's dark silver. And once they had a couple of thin coats and any mistakes cleared, I gave them all a wash with Citadel's non-oil. I decided on a dark grey bolt gun casing for this Imperial Fist, so it wasn't so bumblebee look of black and yellow. So keeping the dark grey from previously, I applied an edge highlight of AK Interactive's neutral grey. I then applied thin layers of AK Interactive's oily steel over any of the silver areas as a slight highlight. Moving on to any other armour areas that weren't going to be yellow, and in the Imperial Fist's case it was usually black, I used Citadel's Abaddon Black and applied it all over the backpack. I then used Citadel's Eshin Grey and built a slight glaze up to the edges for a matte black look, repeating the same glaze technique as used with the yellow areas. Keep it thin and build gradually. And to give a final sharp look, I used Citadel's Dawnstone on the extreme edges of the Eshin Grey before glazing back with Abaddon Black, leaving only a small amount of grey on the edges. Using Pro Acryl's dark silver again, I applied it to all the metallic areas on the backpack. Using a couple of thin coats to build a solid colour, and then also layering over with Citadel's non-oil as before. Now for the magic touch for the yellow, I used Citadel's Contrast Imperial Fist and layered over very carefully and controlled, with less on the brush that you would use for a wash, but more than you would use for layering, and applied on even coat across all yellow areas. This helped bring all the shades, including the buff highlight, into one solid strong golden yellow finish. And once that was finished and dried, I picked out the eyes with a white and then glazed in some Citadel's blood letter to finish them off. And there you go, an easy glaze Imperial Fist. Yellow is just one of those colours that can take time, but will be rewarding in the end if you're patient and take the time to clean up any mistakes before continuing on. Yellow Space Marines always stand out on the table, so I hope you took something from it and have fun painting your Imperial Fists, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.